morning. Thank you for joining today Meet and Learn topic, remove environmental risk from the transaction. My name is Cecilia with Coldwell Banker George Realty in Alhambra, Vice Chair of 2023 Education Commercial Committee. We are honored to have Mr. Ami Adini as our keynote speaker of today. Ami Adini is an environmental professional with over 40 years experience with a degree in mechanical engineering and credits in nuclear and chemical engineering. Mr. Adini performed in nuclear plant facilities, chemical plants, and hazardous wastewater treatment. He is a U.S. EPA qualified environmental professional for all appropriate inquiry in commercial and industrial real estate transactions, and a former registered environmental assessor level 2 with Cal EPA certified for all assessment and investigations. So, besides most of those certified destinations, Mr. Ami is the founder and president of Ami Adini Environmental Services, Inc. That is a firm specializing in phase 1 and phase 2 environmental site assessments and remediation of contaminated sites. So during the presentation, if you have any question on the Zoom, will you please type up in the chat box, and your question will be answered during the Q&A section. And today's presentation is being recorded, and it will be available on YouTube channel, West San Gabriel Valley Realtors, and you will review it. So let's have a welcome, a great round of applause to Mr. Ami Adini.
All right, well, thank you, Cecilia. Our topic of today is, and I'm sorry if I'm a little bit harsh in my voice. I just recovered from a little flu, but so the subject of the day is remove environmental risk from the transaction. And I hope that by the time we are done today, you will have less concerns about risks, environmental risk in transaction. My goal is to convince you that risks can always be reduced with knowledge. Yeah. So we say that knowledge is power, understanding the essence of environmental concerns as they bog down the transaction can save the day to the benefit of all shareholders. And I see it day in and day out. Even just in the past couple of weeks, I saw at least through instances where potentially good transactions are not going through because, in my opinion, of a little bit, not a little bit, but sometimes quite a bit, of unfounded concerns because of lack of understanding. So I hope to deliver to you, to share with you a little bit more understanding today to reduce concerns. And the points that we will touch today upon is, number one, what do phase 1 and phase 2 environmental site assessments do and don't. I mean, there are some misconceptions about what they do, but even more misconceptions about what they don't do. I find, again, very frequently that my clients have misconceptions about phase 1, and they think that it delivers whatever, but it does not deliver what they think it delivers. And it does deliver what they don't know that it delivers. So it's important to know what it does and what it doesn't do, and we will touch upon that. What kind of disclosures are there? What kind of testing is required? Again, there are some misconceptions as to Whether phase one includes testing or not, I can tell you right away that there is no testing done in the phase one process. And what are the costs for doing the reports? Is remediation always required for contaminated properties? This is a very important question because the word remediation scares off quite a few people or stakeholders from good transactions. And I should say right away that remediation is not always needed for contaminated property. So we would like to take this scare away. And what's the difference between remediation and mitigation? That's also important to understand that mitigation, which is prevention of risk, can come instead of remediation, and it is much, much, much more economical. And how do we reduce environmental risk? So we will try to touch upon these points today. And if we don't succeed or we don't have the time, I mean, feel free to call me, connect with me anytime. You will get from me unlimited time to answer every question that you have. Lee Iacocca, a very famous businessman in the United States, I should say late Lee Iacocca by now, said, "We are continually faced by great opportunities, brilliantly disguised as insoluble problems." And they are there. And I see day in and day out what other people consider insoluble, and there are great opportunities behind it. And again, I hope that with the knowledge that I'm going to deliver to you today, at least I will give you the concept, the idea that there are great opportunities and problems can be solved. For me, I've been doing this phase one and phase two since 1988. That's quite some time. And during those years, we did not do just phase one and phase two. We also did a lot of underground storage tank projects, and you can see some of my projects in the picture. In the 1990s and the early 2000s, we handled scores of gasoline stations. We removed tanks, we installed tanks. Down at the bottom right, you see a very nice station in Poway, close to San Diego. And so when I have cases that involve potential risks from underground storage tanks, I know it pretty well, pretty well, because I saw it all. See when some of the tools that we use when we do the phase two. And again, we will explain a little bit later what's the difference between phase one and phase two. But phase two is when we actually do the intrusive sampling. We do not do intrusive sampling in phase one. And you see on the upper left, you see a very large drilling machine. In that particular case, we had to drill down to groundwater at about 100 feet, even deeper, I think 120 feet. And we had to use this robust machine to go there. On the bottom left, you see us exploring for buried tanks. We knew there was a tank there. We did just know how big it was. And we went there with our experts and with all these electromagnetic devices. And we found and we determined the location and the size and the volume or the dimensions of the tank. So we knew what to do with it. In the middle, you see us drilling inside an industrial property. In this case, we went down 40 feet down to groundwater. And this is a different machine. It's not as powerful as the machine on the upper left, but it says it's very, very valuable to drill in limited spaces, and quite efficient machine. And here in this case, we went down 40 feet. On the upper right, you see us pulling out vapor samples, or sometimes we call them soil gas or soil vapor samples, because we are concerned, in some cases, we are concerned about toxic vapors in the ground. And toxic vapors is more problematic than soil contamination. For me, I'm almost never concerned about soil contamination. My main concern is vapor and groundwater contamination, because soil contamination can be handled rather relatively easy. On the bottom right, you see us taking samples by hand. My associate here is drilling and taking samples from a pile by hand. So these are samples should be doing phase 2. Back in the 1990s and the early 2000s, we had a fleet of machines. We were doing a lot of remediation. At that time, in the 1990s and in the 2000s, early 2000s, gasoline stations was the business risk of the day. They were much concerned. Historical tanks used, many of them leaked, and there was a lot of remediation and cleanup going on with gasoline stations. It's not much of a concern today. Most of the gasoline stations have been handled. So this is, nowadays I find it less of a concern when I see cases. But this used to be big in the 1990s and the early 2000s. And here you see a fleet of machines with which we extracted gasoline from the ground and from the groundwater. For me, real quick, I graduated in 1964 with a degree in mechanical engineering, additional credit in nuclear and chemical engineering, and I went to work for 20 years in the nuclear industry and chemical industry. Okay, moved to work in chemical facilities, and actually came to California, graduated to be a general engineering contractor since 1989. And my specialty as a general engineering contractor is in the removal of hazardous substances. And that's what we need. So I'm not only engineer and environmental professional, I am really also a hands-on contractor with a licensed contractor to remove hazardous substances. And I've done quite a bit of that. And you can see here a recent example. This is in a Silver Lake neighborhood in close to downtown Los Angeles. This used to be a Terminix facility. It contaminated the soil with pesticides. We needed to clean it up. My client wanted to put an apartment building here, so we had to clean it up to very strict residential standards. And in the process, we removed about 1,000 tons of contaminated soil. You see it covered with plastic. We took it away, and right now they have a very nice apartment building standing on this side. So you will have questions: what, who, where, when, how, why. So I will be ready to answer them here. And if we don't manage to answer them here, then give me a call or text me at 323-899-5001 or email me at amiadini.com. You will see that I'm always accessible to you for all questions at no limits on time. We have our fourth horseman of the environmental apocalypse, all right? So we have our four apocalyptic horsemen that scare the hell out of our client is soil contamination, groundwater contamination, soil vapor contamination, and indoor air contamination. These are the bad things that we handle, that we deal with in our environmental investigation. Again, soil, groundwater, soil vapor, and indoor air contamination. You will hear us a lot talking about plumes in our industry. It comes from feathers. A plume of feather is a long, soft feather or arrangement of feathers used by a bird for display or worn by a person for ornament. So you see on the left side, the plume of feather. So we borrow this term to our environmental lingo. And on the right, you see here a plume of smoke coming out from those stacks. So it starts again, the smoke starts at the point and spreads out, go out. So this is a plume. And we use the word plume a lot in our environmental language. So I would like you to remember it. It should be easy. It's a plume, like feathers, something that starts at a point and expand over an area. So here are plumes. On the very left side, you see an industrial plant, and it has an underground storage tank, and the storage tank has leaked. You see this kind of dark blue, purple substance coming out from the tank, going into the aquifer. And let us remember what aquifer is. Aquifer is that part of the soil that is saturated with groundwater. So if you dig a little bit deep into the soil next to your home or whatever you live, and eventually you will get to groundwater, depends where you live. Sometimes it will be at 40 feet, sometimes it will be at 400 feet. But there is always groundwater underneath us. It depends on the depth, okay? It depends on the location, but there is always. So if you go to the beach and you dip down 1 foot into the soil, you get into groundwater. You get all of a sudden water coming out of the sand. That's an aquifer. So an aquifer is soil which is saturated with water. It is not an underground river. It is not an underground lake. It is basically soil which is saturated with water. So we have here on the left side, we have this industrial plant, and the tank is leaking this purple stuff, and it is heavier than water. So it goes down into the aquifer and it sinks down. And these kind of chemicals, which are heavier than water, and if they leak in a big way, it's very, very hard to remediate. It's very hard to handle, extremely costly. Fortunately, these are the exceptions and not the rule, but I thought I should show you. So this is one type of a plume that goes down and contaminates the groundwater. The next plume is on the right middle side. You see an upper and above ground tank leaking this reddish substance into the soil. It is lighter than water, so it floats on the water. The one on the left was heavier than water, so it sank down. But this one is lighter than water. It reaches the water table and it floats. It stays on top of it. And so we have, in this case, we have soil contamination. We have a little bit of groundwater contamination. And then if it is like gasoline or the other gasoline, which is lighter than water, it will evaporate and the purple cloud moves aside and can enter into a building next door. And then we have our tenants over there potentially inhaling toxic gas. And so you see that then a subterranean spill from these tanks, the reddish one, converts into this purple cloud underground, and then it enters into the building and becomes an indoor contamination. Here is another conceptual model of gasoline stations that leaked. You see the pumps, the gasoline pumps or dispensers, and then we have two tanks, and one of them on the right side is leaking. It's leaking gasoline. The black stuff is gasoline. It reaches the groundwater. It floats on the water and it moves with the direction of groundwater. It moves sideways. In my experience, sorry. In my experience, I've never seen it to move more than about 500 feet away. I'm not saying that there are not the cases where it moved far away, but this would be, again, the exceptions, not the rule. And I've seen a lot of cases of leaking tanks, underground storage tanks that leak gasoline. And I'm yet to see a plume that moved more than 500 feet away from the source area. Here is a case, a very bad case. This is one of the bad cases that make a very kind of scare our industry a lot beyond reasonable dimensions, I would say. Because this case is the exception, is not the rule, but I thought you should know about it. So we have DTC on the right side. DTC used to be a gasoline station. They leaked a lot. And you see the purple cloud there, which is basically free gasoline, probably a couple of thousands of gallons of gasoline floating on groundwater. Groundwater there is shallow. I think it's about 40 feet. And it reached groundwater and it's floating there. And you see the boundaries of DTC, and this plume of free gasoline already left the property, move under the neighbors. And then the green stuff that you see, this is a gasoline that it dissolved in the water. This is not free gasoline. It dissolved like sugar dissolves in water, and not to the same extent as sugar, but still it dissolves. And it moves as dissolved gasoline, as the green stuff, with a direction of groundwater flow. You see the upper blue arrow points in a direction where groundwater move, and this plume is moving with the groundwater and entering into the ABM. Well, ABM was my original client, and they had a couple of little tanks that leaked, and we removed the tanks, and we found the leak, and we started to remediate it. We started to clean it up, and very fast we found out that something was coming coming at us from uphill. So this is how we discovered the DTC on the right side. And what we realized was that, yes, we have a little contamination at ABM, but we cannot clean it up because DTC keeps feeding it to us. So this was, I believe, when we started with ABM was around 2006. So today we are, what, 17 years later, and the case is not resolved. Already between ABM and DTC, $2.5 million was spent, and the case is still open. They cannot solve it. DTC went bankrupt. They basically deserted the property, abandoned the property. ABM cannot solve it. This is a bad stuff. They spent by now, it says $2.5 million on trying to remediate it. It's not working. Here is another case. Again, this is one of the bad cases, which give us all this scare and bad reputation, but I'm showing them as the exceptions, not as a rule. This case is in Chula Vista, and there was on the right side there, right side of the cloud, it was two gasoline stations. To make the long story short, when we got involved in it, we found out that they had 30,000 gallons of gasoline floating on groundwater and across the street. So it was a big pool of gasoline. And the case is still open. We started it in 2006. It's still open. It's not resolving, and I don't know that it will ever resolve. So again, to some conceptual diagrams on this picture, we show you a tank that is leaking this purple stuff. It's reaching groundwater. It is heavier than water, and it goes down there and it sinks down to the bottom of the aquifer because it's heavier. And then it reaches the bottom of the aquifer and it sinks if there are some holes in it, and then it goes even further. Extremely difficult to clean up. I mean, major portions of San Gabriel Valley are having groundwater contaminated, and there are maps about it, all these contaminated plumes under San Gabriel Valley. Groundwater here is contaminated. And the way they remediate it is that they put a purification plant down at Whittier Narrows, and they pump out groundwater there and then just purify it. That's the only practical way what you can do about it. You cannot remediate it in place. Here is a case of a landfill. You see on the upper right side, you see some drums, and they are not in a good shape, tilted, and they are leaking. You see on the left side a puddle of contaminated stuff. And here is a conceptual diagram of what happened. This is one of the issues that we are still dealing with them today, even in our real estate transactions. And so we have this landfill conceptually on the left. It leaked. The leak came down to groundwater. It moves with the groundwater. It evaporates, and it enters into the building as contaminated toxic vapors. This is a major concern today. Most of our phase 1 and phase 2 real estate transactions, as far as I'm concerned, most of them, I'm concerned mostly about soil vapor contamination. And because this is the kind of the nasty, subtle thing that is hard to recognize, and it enters into a building, and regulatory agencies has become pretty sensible to this kind of risk nowadays. And so it can come from spills into the groundwater, which then evaporate into buildings, and it can come from other sources, which we will touch upon in a moment. And what happens with those toxic vapors start moving in the ground, they find sewer lines, and this becomes highways for them to move fast and spread around through the sewer lines. Sewer lines are not hermetic. They have holes in them. They have faulty connections. And once it enters the sewer line, it can move real fast through the pipe, and then it can reach buildings and then get through the vent pipes of the building into the building. Here is a case in West Los Angeles, and my client still owned the apartment building. You see apartment building, and there is a pointer there, and they needed to refinance, and they retained a phase 1 consultant, and the consultant came and said that they were concerned on the phase 1 because there was on the upper right middle there, where it says a source, they said there was a dry cleaner there. And dry cleaners are the major issues of the day. This is one of the main quote-unquote culprits or in our phase 1 and phase 2 site assessments today. There are, I don't know how many, hundreds of thousands of them all over the nation. You find them, they used to be on every street corner, and they used to use, until now, they used to use a chlorinated solvent as a solvent to clean up the garments. And those solvents that they used were highly, highly toxic. There was no knowledge of it at the time. The solvent was called perchloroethylene, or PERC, short PERC, or perchloroethylene. It came into use in the 1930s, late 1930s, as the savior of the day. It was a great invention for dry cleaning. It did a terrific job as dry cleaning. And for years, from the 1930s until about the 1990s, nobody was aware that they were so toxic. And nobody was aware that they were also getting into the ground. And they were getting into the ground because dry cleaner of old practices, and I'm not blaming them, I'm not calling them culprits or criminals, not at all. Dry cleaners were doing business very honestly, but they were not aware that those solvents were highly toxic. They were not aware that they were highly volatile. And in many dry cleaners, they just spilled them unscrupulously. They spilled them with not the due care into the ground. They spilled them just by spilling on the floor, or by getting them into the sinks or toilets or into the planters. And then it came into the ground, and then it starts spreading as a vapor, toxic vapor in the ground, and it migrates pretty well in the ground as toxic vapor. So the consultant in this case was very concerned, not very, but they were concerned about the source. There was a dry cleaner there, and they raised this concern in the phase 1, and the bank said to my client, do a phase 2. And so we came there to do a phase 2. The job, or the objective, the purpose of the phase 2 is to basically verify or validate the concerns of the phase 1, or basically negate them. Is it or is it not? We know there is a cleaner there, but does he or does he not contaminate the ground? So we tested the soil under the building, and lo and behold, we found this toxic vapor, I showed you here as a cloud under the building. So this was quote unquote the bad news. The good news was that the vapor, the level of contamination there was not so bad, and we gave them a clean bill of health, and they got the loan. So phase 1, environmental site assessment. What does it do? What does it not do? As I said, it's very important to know what it does and what it does not. So there is a standard practice. When we do a phase 1, we go for environmental concerns. Now, what is an environmental concern? We have to define, because if we don't define our concerns, it's like somebody sitting and worrying and worrying and worrying and doesn't even know what they worry about, and they waste their life worrying about, right? So we need to define, what are we concerned? What are the things that we are concerned and in the environmental arena? And so the ASTM, which is American Society for Testing and Materials, in 1992 issued the first standard. I was one of the very first ones that started doing phase 1. I started doing it in 1988. In 1988, there was no standard. Just we knew we need to do a phase 1, and we invented it on the go, okay? But then in 1990, and at the time in 1988, because there was no definition, we were very conservative. And it was not unusual for a phase 1 then to cost $5,000 in 1988 money. What would it be in today's money? I don't know, 15,000, whatever. So so we needed the definition. And in 1992, American Society for Testing and Material came with a standard for environmental site assessment, phase 1 and phase 2, for real estate, commercial real estate transaction. And they said, okay, we are hereby going to define what is those concerns that we are looking for. And they defined those concerns, they call them recognized environmental conditions, RECs in short, recognized environmental condition. And they said, when I do a phase 1 environmental site assessment, I need to identify recognized environmental conditions. And if I declare that there is a recognized environmental condition, most conventional lenders and all SBA loans, they will not do the loans unless we do a phase 2. So the moment we declare a recognized environmental condition in a phase 1, if you go for conventional lending, if you go for SBA lending, there will be no loan until we do a phase 2. So the term recognized environmental condition means, 1, the presence of hazardous substances or petroleum products in, on, or at the subject property due to a release to the environment. So this is very straightforward. It's very positive in a way. It's real. I go to a property, I see there puddles of oil, puddles of contaminated stuff. I see the drums leaking. Okay, there is an actual presence of hazardous substances on the property, and they were released. Okay, if I see a drum and it is very well locked and sealed, and there is hazardous substance, that's not a condition because it is closed, it is hermetically sealed. That's not a problem. But there has to be a release. If I see this drum leaking, then I have a presence, and right away I declare a recognized environmental condition. So if I go to do a phase 1, you better clean up your act before I go there, all right? So I will not declare condition just because you did not keep your house clean, all right? So that's number 1. Number 2, it's complicated, much more complicated. And it says the likely presence. So likely introduces speculation, probability. The likely presence of hazardous substances or petroleum products in, on, or at the subject property due to a release or likely release. So there are 2 likelies here. Likely presence due to a release or likely presence due to a likely release to the environment. And this is a complicated one, and I will not spend words on it right now because I will demonstrate it to you in pictures right away. And number 3 is, again, this is more easy to understand, the presence of hazardous substances or petroleum products in, on, or at the subject property under conditions that pose a material threat of a future release to the environment. So I go to your place and I see some containers and I know that they are going to leak in a hurry, and I say, oh, wait a minute, you need to maintain those containers because they may leak, and I declare a condition. But I would say that probably a good 99% of the cases where I declare, when I've seen, when my associates declare recognized environmental conditions really fall into a category 2, and we'll see examples right away. So here's category 1, or REC, recognized environmental condition number 1, the presence of any hazardous substance or petroleum product in, on, or at sub property due to a release. Real release. So here is this property. This is a strip plaza on San Vicente Boulevard in Los Angeles. And I go there to the electrical room and see on the left side, I see this drum standing there, and the bottom of the drum is corroded, and all this substance is leaking from the drum, and I step into it, and I cannot pull my foot out of there, my shoe out of there. And I say, oh, what is that? You know, of course, this is very positive presence of hazardous substance, not only on the property, but next to the electrical panel. I mean, how bad can it be? How much worse can it be? Anyway, so this is recognized environmental condition number 1. Here is a little bit more complicated, recognized environmental condition number 1. In this case, this property is on the corner of, in Santa Monica. Santa Monica Boulevard is on the right, the 17th Street is here on the left. And here in this property, I removed the tanks in 1992. Gosh, it's 30 years ago. I removed the tanks, and you see on the upper left corner of this property, there is this patch, asphalt patch, where the tanks used to be. So here is what happened when we removed the tanks. Here is the conceptual diagrams. You see on the right side, again, the plot plan of the property. You see where the tanks used to be. You see where the dispenser islands used to be. We removed the tanks, and there was contamination in the excavation. So we drilled it down. On the left, you see, we took samples all the way down to groundwater at 100 feet. We found contamination there, and we excavated a little bit from the tank excavation, and the city decided that this was good, and they gave us a closure. They closed the case. So I get a call from a prospective investor. He wants to buy the property, and he says, well, Ami, it's clean, right? There was tanks, it was removed, you removed the tanks, the city closed the case, gave us a closure, no further action, so we are good. I say, yes, but there is contamination in the ground. So if I'm going to do a phase 1 environmental site assessment, on this case, I declare environmental condition here because the property is contaminated due to a known release. And not only that, when you are going to buy it, you are going to redevelop it. He says, yes. I say, are you going to put some building here there? He says, yes. Are you going to have subterranean garage or subterranean levels? Yes. So the moment you dig down for subterranean levels, you will hit contaminated soil, and everything comes to a halt, and you will need to handle contaminated soil. So this is a condition that you need to be aware of. He says, how much? I say, it will cost you about $250,000. So just build it into your investment, and you will be okay. So this is a condition that is still there. It's positive. It's still there, and we declare it as a condition. Here is another example. This was in Culver City, a school, and they excavated down, and we found all this contamination, and the entire project came to immediate stop. And because contamination was emitting toxic odor, toxic vapors, and the workers were complaining about headaches, and nobody wanted to work. And you see my foreman standing up on the left there, spraying this special substance to extinguish the vapors. And we had to dig away about 2,000 tons of contaminated soil before the construction continued. And so here is a case, or again, the recognized environmental condition 1, there is a presence, it's actual positive presence due to a release to the environment. Okay. Here is a condition number 2. My client owns the red rectangle up there. This is a property in Crescent City. Crescent City is a few miles away from Oregon border in California. And we already know he wants to do a phase 1, but I already know. I told him I don't even need to tell you that what the phase 1 will say, because it is very well known that the area around you, this is redwood countries. There used to be a lumber industry there, and it's a known case that the groundwater there is heavily contaminated because there was a lumber plant there. They used all these toxic materials, and it got into the soil, it got into the water. Groundwater there is about 5 feet under the ground. It's going under your property. You have a contaminated property. And but since we never took samples, so I said to him, well, you have a case here of likely presence, because I'm telling you, I've not seen it, I've not taken any test, but because what I know about the history of the place, there is a likely presence due to a real release in the area. There was a release, and it is likely under your building. So this is a condition. Here is another condition, which I touched upon it before. This is my client that needed to refinance the apartment building, and there was a dry cleaner there. But when the consultant did the phase 1, before we did the phase 2, all what they said was, look, we have dry cleaners. We are concerned that they leaked. They don't know that they leaked, okay? So they don't know if they leaked. They don't know if they contaminated, but they know that already 75% of the old dry cleaners have contaminated their properties and contaminated the area. And that's not a small number. That's by EPA actual statistics, 75% of dry cleaners cause contamination. So they say, we have a dry cleaner. I don't know if he leaked or not, but it is likely that they leaked. So there is a likely presence. And then I don't know if the contamination has reached to your property, the phase 1 consultant says. So it could be, I'm sorry, so there is a likely release at the dry cleaner, which causes a likely presence at your properties. These are too likely. I don't know that they release, he says, so it's a likely release, and I don't know if it reached your properties, it's a likely presence. So 2 likelies here, And when we get to these two likelies in our phase one, we declare it as a condition. And once we declare this as a condition, right away, the banks, most conventional banks and SBA will require a phase two. This is a recognized environmental condition number 3. And again, this is a simple one. This is the presence of hazardous substances and petroleum products on a property in a condition to pose a material threat or a future release. So I walk to this property, I see these drums, they are not in a good housekeeping shape, and I'm very concerned that they may topple any moment and may leak. I declare a condition, so this is why I'm saying, when you call me to your property, make sure you have a good housekeeping there, so I don't see this condition, so I don't have to declare a condition. Here is another case. You see this rusty tank. When I see this, right away, I declare a condition. A few words about the dry cleaners. I already mentioned them several times, that this is probably the problem of the day in our phase one's environmental site assessments. Dry cleaners used to use PCE as a dry cleaning solvent. PCE, I'm reading here to you the verbiage over there. PCE is also also known as perchloroethylene, PERC, tetrachloroethylene, tetrachloroethene, and other names. It is a combination of chlorine and carbon, colorless liquid, widely used by dry cleaning of fabrics, also called dry cleaning fluid. PERC is volatile, readily evaporates at room temperature. And this is true. I walked the other day, and I mean, I'm sorry about, not the other day, but about 6 years ago, to a dry cleaner, and there was a container of PERC standing there, open. As soon as I walked into the room, I smelled it. It's a very sweet smell. I should say it's tempting to inhale it, but I knew that I would rather not inhale it because it is probable carcinogen. It is a central nervous system depressant and enters the body through inhalation or contact with skin. So you can inhale it or you can touch it. It will penetrate the skin and get into your body. California banned its use in new machines in 2007 and banned all use by 2023. Evidence suggests that the exposure increases the risk of Parkinson's disease 9-fold. Has been shown to cause live liver tumors in mice and kidney tumors in male rats at temperatures over 315 centigrade. PCE can oxidize into phosgene, an extremely poisonous gas. So firefighters, if they know that there is PERC in a place that they're going to enter and it is on fire, they will be very, very careful because it can turn into phosgene and it's extremely poisonous gas. Chronic exposure has been linked to color vision deficiencies, etc. So it's a bad stuff. Enter into outdoor and indoor by evaporation, may evaporate from contaminated groundwater and soil into indoor air. So this is probably the main concern today in our phase one environmental assessment. Machine shops in the past, they, even today, they use degreasers to remove oil. Machine shop, they use a lot of oil when they make parts. And in the past, they used PERC, solvent, the perchloroethylene, to remove the oil as a degreaser. So when we know we do a phase one and we know that there was a machine shop in the area, or in our properties that we test, we right away raise a flag of possible recognized environmental condition. Here is another case. This is my client owns a property under this yellow square, and this is close to Beverly Hills, close to Beverly Center, and the area used to be all oil field at the time. Every black spot that you see here is an abandoned oil well. So we have asphalt that coming from the ground, we have tar coming from the ground. So if we know when we go to this area, right away we look to see if the property is sitting on an old oil well, and my client happened to sit on an old oil well. So what is included in phase one environmental site assessment? What do we do there? First of all, it has to be done by an environmental professional. EPA has defined what is an environmental professional. They have a pretty comprehensive definition, and it is in the EPA regulation. Environmental professionals must meet specific education, experience, and certification requirements. And so it has to be done by environmental professionals, and I'm happy to say that I qualified for that. When we're doing phase ones, we have the user. Anybody can ask us to do a phase one. The user could be of the report. The user could be an acquirer, a buyer, an acquirer of a property. It could be a potential tenant of a property. You go to occupy a property as a tenant. You want to know that it is okay. Could be an owner of a property who's looking to sell it. It could be a lender. It could be a property manager. Anybody could do a phase one. Just a second. I need to drink a little bit of water because I'm getting dry. So mostly phase ones, my clients are doing the phase one mostly involve owners and buyers or the attorneys of the owners and the buyers. Out of the phase one, we do interviews. We interview past owners, present operator, anybody that can give us information. We interview them to learn about the property. And we ask them, we present with them with a list. When we interview owners or tenants, we give them a list, and at first it is scary, but it really should not. We tell them, okay, go ahead and check. Check this list, anything. If you have anything in those lists and it is immediately available to you, please give it to us. So document, we are looking for documents. We are looking for records of environmental cleanup liens. We check on the history of the property. We go all the way to the time that it was first developed. And sometimes we go all the way to the late 1800s. We do aerial photography. We have pretty decent aerial photographs until the 1920s. So we investigate, we research aerial photography to know about the property. These are topographic maps. We have good topographic maps until the late 1800s. They tell us about the history of the property. City directories. These are, I consider this one of the most beneficial resource of information. City directories, we have good city directories until 1940s, and they tell us the characters of the tenants by the name of the tenants. Here is an example. Here's an example of one city directory on 2205 Durfee Avenue. And he tell me on this property in 1957, it used to be a shell service. 1966, it used to be a mobile station. It used to be a body shop in 1999, just by the names, all right? So that gives us a pretty valuable information. And then we go for what we call radius maps. We check over 300, again, over 300 government databases. We have a special contractor that does it for us, and we buy this research from them because this is their specialty. And they give us a radius map. And our property is in the center of this radius map, and we click on the center. I mean, this is in the center, and every dot around that you see is a site of potential concern. And what we do when we move to this map, we click on this point, and every we click, we get a drop-down menu. Just a second, I need to drink some water. Excuse me for a moment, but I'll have to sit, okay? I just recovered from a 2 days flu yesterday, so it seems like my body is a little bit weak, but that's okay. You still see me. Okay, that's good. That's much better. So you see every point that we click on, it gives us a drop-down window, drop-down menu. And when we click on the drop-down menu, I'm sorry. Let's move. When we click on the drop-down menu, it opens a whole catalog of information for us. So in this way, we get electronically a tremendous amount of information about the property and about surrounding properties. So And then we inspect the property. We go there, what we call reconnaissance, and this is, we do a visual inspections. We take a lot of pictures of the property and surrounding properties. And sometimes I can take 200, 300 pictures. It's not unusual. And eventually we issue the report. Now, the phase 1 report, it's not unusual for it to be anywhere from 1,000 to 3,000 pages. Depends on the amount of information. It's like an electronic book. And of course, we don't expect our clients to read this book. So we give them an executive summary. Usually it's about 2 or 3 pages long. And in it, we summarize what we found. We summarize our opinions, conclusions, and recommendations. And I find out that most of my clients don't even read the executive summary. So I give them even shorter summary in my email. When I send them the report, I say, okay, this is what we found, very plain, simple language. But the report itself is done in accordance with a very strict standard. It has to be done this way. I know that most of my clients are only interested in the bottom line, and I give it to them. But whatever bottom line I give to them, it's backed up sometimes, as I said, by anywhere from 1,000 to 3,000 pages of data. General Patton said, take calculated risk that is quite different from being rash. So he encourages us to take calculated risk because if we are too careful, we can miss on good opportunities. And then Mario Andretti, a famous car driver, says, race car driver, says, if things seem under control, you're just not going fast enough. So if those of us that seek ultimate control and ultimate conservatism in terms of adventures, we don't get anywhere, right? So we have to keep a balance between risk and control, or between risk and moving fast. And so the phase 2. So as we said in the phase 1, the moment we declare a condition, most of our bankers, lenders, and most of our clients will require phase 2. So phase 2, what does it do? And again, we'll say in a minute what it does not do. So we need to understand the concept of the phase 2 is to validate or invalidate the recognized environmental conditions that we raised in the phase 1. Because in the phase 1, most of the conditions that we raised, of the alarms that we raised, are about likely situation. We don't know if it happened, but we don't know that it didn't happen, and we are concerned that it might happen. So it's a phase 1. So phase 2 is basically to say, okay, did it or did it not happen? So it's a yes or no type of proposition. And here are a few examples. On the right side, it's not far away from here, in La Puente on the right side, my client develops this property for condominiums, and it is next to the 60 freeway. And they are concerned about what is called aerially laden lead, ADL, aerially from aerial laden. It's loaded with lead. And in the old times, cars were used to drive gasoline with lead compounds in it, and where the gases that were emitting from the exhaust pipe had lead. And this lead would spread out as vapor and land on properties next to the freeway. Just a week ago, I was retained to sample. My client is a contractor and doing some repair work or development work along Freeway 405, and they excavated soil from next to the freeway, and they invited me, retained me to test the soil, see if it is contaminated with lead because of this concern. And guess what? I found lead in the soil, and I found it in such an amount that defined it as hazardous waste. So it is real. And so my client here is developing this property, and so I went there and tested it for lead. I did not find lead, so this was clear. It was a yes or no answer. We are concerned about lead. We don't know if there is lead. I tested it, no lead, period. This was a phase 2 done. On the left side, My client wants to buy this property. They did the phase one. The phase one guy said, I did not do the phase one. They were concerned about a car dealership, a car mechanic there. So we went, and every red star there, we took a sample, and we found some contamination. But we said, okay, yes, it is contaminated, but it's not a problem. We gave them a clean bill of health. So these are phase twos with good results. Here is another one. My client owns this property. He invites me to do a phase one. I take a look at it from above with Google aerials, and I see all these mounds of illegal dumping. I say to him, look, you may want also that I will take some sample from this illegal dumping, because they may have imported contamination into your property. So he says, okay. So I do my phase one, and I already take samples, cost him another $700, and I do the phase two, phase one at the same time, and it all comes clean, and he was happy. Okay, this is a complicated case. We'll skip on it. Oh, what does it not do? Let's go. Go back a little. So phase two, what does it not do? There are a lot of misconceptions about phase two. Remember, I told you that the phase two is a yes or no answer. Is it or is it not contaminated? Here is what it does not do is an extensive investigation. I have a client right now that I did the phase two 2 weeks ago, and it's in South Central, and I found that there was contamination there. And I found that the contamination that I found was pretty extensive. And he says, how much will it cost me to clean it up? And I say, I don't know. I know that I know that you have a high fever. It's basically like borrowing it from a medical doctor or whatever. I know you have a high fever. I know that you are contaminated. I don't know how deep it is. I don't know how wide it is. So I don't know if you need to clean it up, and if you need to clean it up, how much it will cost. I have no idea. All what I know is that you have a high fever. That's what I know. So phase two does not do the extensive investigation that is needed to evaluate the full magnitude of the problem. Here in this case, I showed you before in another slide, but this is another rendition of the same situation, where we had on the upper right, we had this gasoline station that contaminated big way, and the plume went down across the street, across the property to my client on the left. And right now, as I said, it's over $2.5 million, but when they retained me at the time to find out the magnitude of the problem, just the work that I did, if it was partial, was $250,000. So this is not a phase two. We need to understand that. So phase one, typical prices, I find them today between $1,800 to $3,000. That's the typical prices for phase one. That's a range of the cost. Phase two typical goes anywhere from $6,000 to $20,000, just to give you an order of magnitude. So again, phase one processes anywhere from $1,800 to $3,000. Depends on the complexity of the property. Phase two, anywhere from $6,000 to $20,000. Industrial phase two are much higher. Schedule, we like to ask for phase one report. We like to ask for 3 weeks. Phase two, again, we like to ask for 3 weeks. But what happens, and if you are planning on a transaction, you better, I always suggest, especially for a seller, for the owner that's going to sell the property, I tell the seller, if you can, do it yourself, okay? Be prepared with the phase one. Don't wait to open escrow, because then you may have surprises that the phase one will find problems, then you have to extend the escrow, then you start negotiating with buyer and seller, with buyers, as to who will pay it and who will do that and what, and you're losing a lot of time this way. And then we do the phase three, and then again goes negotiation. So it's always better to know ahead of time, if you can, what you are facing up with, and it's up, of course, to the seller to know before they go into escrow, if they can, and to be prepared for it. So Herbert Spencer says the great aim of education is not knowledge but action. So I hope that what I delivered to you today will prompt you to action, that you will not be stultified, you will not be paralyzed by fears from the phase one or phase two. There is always a solution. Everything has a solution. As long as we understand the problems, there is always a solution to it. Again, call me, ask me. You have my text and call phone number and text number 323-899-5001. You have my email, amia@amiadini.com. You will find that I'm always available to you. And thank you for being such a good audience. And if we have any questions, you have any questions, Cecilia?
There's no question on Zoom, but, oh, there's one? I just checked. Oh, just came in? Okay, let me check. Okay, thank you. So the question is, how long is the report, phase 1, good for?
That's a very good question. I think it's good for 6 months. After that, it's not completely invalid, but after 6 months, we have to repeat certain sections. So we don't have to do everything of it, and it will not cost the full fee of it, but we will have to repeat a couple of actions there.
Okay, Tiffany, is your question be answered? Anything you want to add? Okay, no more. I do have a question for the phase 1, phase 2, not only for the newly transaction, right? For any existing buildings, do they need to follow up periodically?
No, only there is no need. Once a phase 1 is done, or a phase 2, and everything is clear,
Okay.
they don't need to follow up periodically at all. What will happen is, after a few years, if they go to a new transaction, the banks will ask to do again the phase 1.
Okay.
You see?
Yes.
But only if because it's really, the need for it is being prompted by the lenders.
Okay.
And if we did the phase 1 5 years ago, they will say, okay, do a new phase 1. That's all. But
Okay.
they don't, as soon as we did it, they don't have to repeat it all the time. There is no need for it.
Okay, but if there's no loan at all, like for some apartment or some building or gas station, car wash, is there the city required to do it time to time?
No, there is no law that requires to do phase 1 or phase 2. What drives our industry, what is driving it, are the lenders and the concerned buyers. And they are concerned that they want to make sure that the transaction is good, there is no problem.
Okay.
But when you own a property, you don't have any obligation to do a phase 1 or a phase 2.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much for the informative, presentation. On behalf of West San Gabriel Valley Realtors, many thanks for Amy's presentation today. So there are more classes and presentations coming up. Please do check on West San Gabriel Board website under education schedule, and please do register and attend. Okay, yeah, many thanks again. So tomorrow on the 22nd, there's a CRMLS metrics training virtual regarding realistic tests. And on the 29th, there's another class training for how to manage listings. So please do register. Thanks again, and wish you all have a happy and grateful Thanksgiving. Bye-bye.